Same here.
Hey guys, it's Erica Strother-Maroy, Community Specialist here at ICMI, and today I'm honored to be joined by three esteemed panelists who are regular participants in our weekly Twitter chat, ICMI Chat. Today with me I have Al Hopper from Social Path, I have Justin Robbins here from ICMI, as well as Neal Topf from Callzilla. Quick background before we get started. Some of you may not be aware that every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, we host a 1-hour live chat on Twitter. It's hashtag ICMIChat. I know these guys will attest to the fact that it's a really fun hour, but it's not just fun. It's a good way to network with other members of the contact center community, as well as share ideas and learn. So if you're interested in learning more about getting involved with that group, my contact information is listed below, and I'd love to help you get involved. The reason that we're here today for this panel-style chat is actually because of a tweet chat that took place last week, all about new contact center metrics. And we found that we weren't able to discuss all of these topics in just 140 characters. It was quite a lively, fast-paced chat with a lively group. So I wanted to get these guys together to expand upon some of the things that we touched on yesterday. So first of all, thank you guys for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us.
Erica, I'm sorry that you have to try to control the three of us. I'll say that now so that we're covered for the rest of the conversation.
I'm up for the challenge. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it.
It's just like the Twitter version, but better. So why don't we dive right in? Yesterday was a really fun chat, and Neal, you hosted, so appreciate your hosting duties. And since you are our host for yesterday, I'm going to pose this first question to you first, and then we'd love to hear your thoughts, Justin and Al. But want to know your thoughts on how more traditional metrics that have typically applied to the phone can be applied to new metrics, and do you think to new channels, I should say. And do you think that any of the traditional phone-based metrics don't work for new channels? Neal, would love your thoughts.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So the question is a fantastic one. We definitely got into it yesterday. At the sake of being a little risky here, I think I'm going to, without a doubt, definitely disagree with probably what Justin will say here on this one, because we alluded to this a little bit. I definitely think that phone-based metrics are a starting point. They're not the be-all and end-all, but they provide a framework. The traditional metrics such as service levels, average speed of answer, abandon rate, those things in and of themselves tell a part of the story. They don't tell all the story, but they can give you pieces of the puzzle that give you an idea of where you stand. They definitely don't give you the complete color palette of what a customer experience is, but it gives you a glimpse of kind of what's going on at a productivity level, pieces of what the customer is experiencing, how long it's taking for their call, their chat, their email, their tweet, etc., to be answered. That begins to talk about what's going on. Again, it's not the be-all and end-all, but I think it gives you a jumping-off point. There's, of course, a much bigger set of metrics, new and traditional, that can tell you kind of what's going on and what that customer experience is like. For multiple reasons, companies haven't adapted or adopted them yet. I think it's a natural progression that those metrics will continue to be adapted by call centers, outsourcers, in-house brands, the whole collection. But I think it's a matter of time. But to summarize, I definitely think that some of those traditional metrics are a great starting point. They give you an idea of what's happening, but it's definitely not the whole picture, but it can certainly help, and it's instructive.
Okay. Al, I know you have really strong feelings on this one, particularly about first contact resolution. So what do you think? Are there any metrics that they're typically used for phone that don't really translate well to these new channels like social media?
Well, FCR, first contact resolution, I think definitely a big one. And this really drove a lot of conversations. I know it's the topic of one of the blogs that I just put out with ICMI. I think the change has to be in definition. Traditionally in a call center, first contact resolution, one call solves them all, right? Like the big one ring of customer service. But as call centers started evolving into specialized units, I think that had to possibly change to being the first call versus first contact. And you know, the client's calling you one time, that's their first call. Whether you as an agent can handle that or you have to get a unit specialist on the line, still the same call, still kind of an evolution. And then I think even further with social, and this is where a lot of the conversation I had yesterday during ICMI chat or even after, was the new definition of first conversation resolution. Um, with Twitter, it's very asynchronous. Customers will tweet to your brand when they want to, when it's convenient for them, and you would try to respond in a real quick and timely manner, but they might not respond back to you in the same way. And so, in a true sense of first contact, we would be required to resolve the issue in the first tweet that we respond back. It's not always going to be possible for a variety of different things. That's another conversation we can have. And Justin and I started that last year even. But I think that that's really the change in definition. It's the same at heart, but the way that the message and the channels are evolving. One thing that I just picked up from Neal that I'm really going to look into now is the idea of taking abandonment rate. Again, from a traditional call center, you can measure that pretty easily through your IVR, but what about in Twitter? You know, if you have a customer that reaches out, you've got to get more information from them to give them the right answer, but they never respond, so you don't get that back and forth. Now that could be considered an abandonment rate. You know, we used to track that as a closed pending. You know, so from our perspective, we can't do anything else until the customer responds back to us. So it's closed from us, but it's pending their next conversation. That could very easily, I think, be translated into abandonment rate. I never even looked at that. So that, you know, that's really going to be cool to try to do some research on.
Definitely. So I want to bring Justin into the fold. Al touched on the fact that there was quite a bit of debate, especially around FCR yesterday. And you had a little side debate going. And one of the things you mentioned is that it's okay if we all have a different definition for FCR. Do you mind elaborating on that and why you think that's the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, I want to take a step back because actually, Neal, I'm going to surprise you here in saying that I agree with you. I know, shocking. And here's the why I'm saying that. Metrics for a really long time, and even still today in a lot of organizations and a lot of people view them as kind of like Thor's hammer, right? They're this big piece of destruction that we just use to slam down on things, to make a point, to hold someone accountable, to do something. And so the problem that's plagued us contact centers in particular is that all of our metrics have been inward focused on efficiency, inward focused on doing more with less, inward focused on trying to stretch our resources right as far as they can possibly go before they snap, and in a lot of cases they end up snapping before we realize it. And what the biggest change and the biggest kind of shift that's happened with new channels and really just the way that customers have put themselves at the front of the conversation is now it's easy for me to amplify my voice as a consumer. My expectations of what I want an organization to do and how quickly I expect them to respond to me have changed. And what organizations are discovering is that the customer is now the driver of the metrics. The things that we're measuring, the things we're putting most important, have to be focused on what's going to get the best possible outcome for the customer, assuming that's important to us. If we still have a part of our organization that has to be driven by efficiency, has to be driven by cost, and all of us to some degree will, we're going to have a place for some of those old metrics that have been around forever, will continue to be around forever because they're really sound at getting those fundamental basic things. That said, we absolutely have to evolve. We have to be looking more outward and more at what's going to provide the best possible customer experience and the return we can get from there. That said, here's where FCR comes into play. Really, FCR, like any other metric, it only matters to me based off of what I'm planning to do with it. Anything I measure is all based off of an outcome, a desired result, right? What's most important to me. So here's an example. I called my credit card company a week ago because I had a question about points, right? I had points that had expired. I didn't think they should expire. I wanted them reinstated. My credit card company had it as a security measure because they didn't empower the front line to just reinstate those points. They needed to escalate it to a supervisor. If I was running that contact center and I said, I don't ever want that to change, I want to have a supervisor in this special case authenticate that, then I'm never going to measure first contact resolution in the respect of, did that frontline rep resolve my issue? Because no, they couldn't, and no, I don't want them to, right? I want it to get escalated. I want it to go to that second tier. But maybe I run a different credit card company, and I want to be different, and I think it is important for agents to resolve it and them have the authority to do it. Well, then I'm going to measure and I'm going to define first contact resolution differently, right? So it's not just the process and the procedures we want to have in place, but then there's the technology piece and how we can measure it, right? We know from ICMI's research that some just measure it based off the agent says, yeah, it's resolved. The customer called in to change her maiden name to her married name, and I fixed it. And now we're trusting that agent that that's what happened. We don't know. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just checked it off. Some of us are surveying the customers. We're getting the customer's perspective. Even others of us are using technology to find it. And so you've got kind of this different disconnected pieces of information, no clear picture, and then no clear definition. So, and that's okay, because, each of us are going to have different ways to gain insight, and each of us are going to have different types of experiences we want our customers to have. So ultimately, what's important to us is to know what's best for our customer, what do they find most important, what's easiest for them, and how can we support that with our existing staff, our existing processes, our existing technologies. Right, well, what's best for our customer, and what can we most realistically do as an organization? That's going to feed how we define first contact resolution. That's going to feed how we measure it, and that's completely okay.
That really follows right into the conversation I had after ICMI chat about FCR definition. Gentleman and I were talking about on Twitter how their organization will actually wait and give a window before determining if something was FCR'd. They give like a 3-day window to determine it, and I thought about that, and from my previous employer and previous contact centers I've worked with, we didn't even look at that. It was the one call to solve them all, and it was kind of determined at that point. Did the client wrap up? And so they created part of the call flow. Have I resolved all of your issues today? And at that point, that was the yes or no checkbox for when a manager was monitoring to determine if that was FCR'd. We didn't go back and go, okay, well, they asked them, so it should have been because the client said it was, but then the client maybe misunderstood or deleted their notes and needed to call back on the same issue 3 days later. And so it truly, by any stretch, you're right, it wouldn't have been FCR'd or one-stopped, but at the same time, if you're measuring one call, then that's really what you got to look at. You can't, in my opinion, go forth and say, well, what if they call back 3 days later? Because you'll never really be able to measure it.
Yeah, so here's an example of that, Alan. For people listening to this, you're going to have your cases where certain things it takes 3 to 5 days for maybe a third party to process something, or maybe it takes till the next billing cycle for something to appear. In that case, I wouldn't know today. I wouldn't know if the credit showed on your statement in 15 days, in 30 days. And so for organizations that know those types of situations are going to happen, that's when do you put in, do you have the technology where you can, mark this account that we went to process a refund, and then, whatever the date when that would process, does the system go back and identify this was flagged for refund, yet it didn't receive it, so what do we have to do, right? And that's where we get to kind of the next step of, what goes beyond FCR, and it's about next issue avoidance. And, that's one where, I look at how the Internet of Things and how connected devices are changing contact centers, and to me, I think we're going to see not just next issue avoidance, but issue avoidance in general really become at the forefront of what the contact center focuses on and the metrics that we put into place to drive it.
I can definitely attest to the myriad of ways there are that companies are calculating or making an attempt to calculate it. I think the point of the 3-day window is brilliant. I've never, as an outsource provider, seen that. I would love to. I think it makes absolute sense. I was I wanted to applaud that as well. I have a client, so again, we're an outsourcer. We have multiple ways our clients ask us to address FCR. We have one client that has two different approaches. Post-call IVR survey, and simultaneously they're looking at switch data to see how many times or how many unique calls they're receiving from customers. It's interesting that that one particular client uses two different methodologies. I don't know which one is better, more weighted than the other. The fact is they're looking at two. Maybe they're not even using the data. They're making the effort, but look, it's an example of they're not so sure. They're not so clear either on what's best.
Honestly, Neal, multiple source data for that is great because it gives you a better idea of the entire picture, right? I'm not just counting on the customer to tell me. I'm not just counting on an agent to tell me, but I'm also looking at, you know, the origin of the phone number, the Twitter handle, or the email address. And so when we look at organizations that are getting, you know, as close as possible to measuring FCR, they're looking at those multiple sources of data. But the reality is, and Al, we talked about this last year, is that no one will ever get to being able to measure 100% and knowing that we've got first contact resolution. And for those of you that tell you that they can, right now with existing technology today, right, I will look you straight in the eyes and tell you that you're not being truthful, because there's all of these factors, all these mitigating circumstances that can prevent it from being an accurate picture of what's really happening.
But I think that just to put a cap on this, I'm not sure what happened with Erica, but I'm sure we can move on. You know, I think it goes back to what is the definition for your organization? What does your organization need from that data? You know, I really think that in social, especially, you know, some industries, some verticals, they can't ever do first contact, or maybe they have some things that they can do first contact, some things they can't. So when monitoring your agent that's what metrics are for, right? Monitoring the agent and giving that feedback, you know, does this really mean that they should be penalized? You know, coming from, say, banking, where I came from before moving on to social path, you know, if a customer reached out to me and asked for what are the type of accounts that you offer at your bank, I can give them a link. That's considered FCR if we stopped it. But if they said, you know, hey, there's a fee on my account, what's going on? Well, I can't solve that one stop in a social media, you know.
Yeah. Well, and so that goes back to the point of, and then if that's the case, then probably don't even bother trying to measure it. Don't worry about first contact resolution for whatever that circumstance is, because it's not going to change. You don't want to do anything about it. So if it's not, you know, possible and you're not going to change it, then don't even worry about focusing on it. You know, one of the things that we had talked about when I know we were thinking about this conversation today was the idea of new metrics, and so. One of the things that I mentioned is this idea of focusing on avoiding future issues, and how the contact center with connected things are going to have to be avoiding issues, and issue avoidance is going to be our focus over a lot of things kind of moving forward. I'm just curious, and I think Erica was curious too, about what do you guys think as far as like new metrics that are going to be coming out in the contact center otherwise?
Neal, you want to take first crack?
Sure. I'm going to bet I might say the same thing that you have going on in your mind, and I think you mentioned it yesterday during yesterday's chat, which is customer effort score. That's one of the ones that certainly many of us are putting that out there as kind of the next greatest thing. I don't think, as I had said before, I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. However, I think that we're going to see more and more companies starting to use it, trying to get a better understanding of what it really means, if it's going to be a long-term metric or not. I think there's value in it, but I think like perhaps Net Promoter Score and even perhaps some CSAT surveys, it's what I call a gateway drug. It gets you into the conversation. It gets you kind of your first taste of really what's going on. It doesn't give you the whole picture, but it gives you maybe the hunger and the thirst to try more, to get into the data, ask more questions, really peel back the onion, to use a ton of other business cliches, but to get a sense of really what's going on. And it sets you up to be able to do that. I think it remains to be seen if it's going to be a long-term metric. I think when you use customer effort score, a part of it, and perhaps more than if we were to put a number on it, maybe a large or majority portion of the response is related directly to the contact center, but I don't think that all of the score necessarily is attributable to the contact center. There's tons of other ingredients that go into that, into the feedback or response that a customer gives. And Al, I think you were a pioneer in yesterday's chat. I was hoping that someone was eventually going to mention customer effort score, but I think it took all of 30 seconds before you put it out there, which means that you're taking the lead on this one.
Well, I don't know about taking the lead, and I appreciate the idea of being called a pioneer, but I really can't take that credit either. Customer effort score to me is the next step in the evolution. So right now, and Help.com shared a great article with me, and I put it out on Twitter yesterday about what customer effort score is. And right now it's kind of evolved into a and metric. So it's you have a 10-question survey. One of them is for NPS, the whole, rank me 1 to 10 on how likely you're going to recommend me to someone else. And then another question is, how easy was it for you to get your issue resolved? And that's where the CES is right now, the customer effort score. I challenge people that are really interested in customer effort score to look beyond just what the customer feedback says. The customer everyone's going to rank things differently. We all realize that in the contact center areas. But, how difficult was it to get resolution? So was it something as simple as I Googled a question and found a community answer? I called one time and got my answer? I sent a tweet? What if you did all three? What is the method of measuring that? So right now it is a survey question, and it's kind of like an and this for a lot of surveys that goes right along with NPS. I'm okay with that to an extent, but I'm really interested in the data science behind it, and I think that's what you're going at, Neal. How many CRMs that are out there can measure or can even recognize if a person went to a self-help site, then their app, then their call, then their social media? There's so many different channels that are out there. I haven't seen anything that's robust enough to really be able to tie in every single tool and every single metric into that. I was talking with another company one time, and they're just trying to get off the ground. They're building out their registration process. They're interested in social media, and talking with me at Social Path. And one of the things that I said was, well, how do you manage or how do you track who your customers are in social media? Is that even an entry in your CRM? And it wasn't. And I was blown away. I was like, how do you not put that into your registration if it's going to be on your roadmap of trying to engage them on social? And then I have, my other experience of all these legacy systems that were created and built well before social media was even a thing. And now you're trying to figure out how to add in social media identifiers so that you can tie those customers together. And I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, so a couple things that I want to speak to here. So I've spent pretty much most of this year just researching this, pretty much everything we just talked about. And a number of things have come out of that. First, we released a report with Zendesk over the summer where we explored who's actually measuring CSAT, who's measuring Net Promoter, who's measuring customer effort. And to your point, most organizations are measuring customer satisfaction. Fewer are measuring Net Promoter. Even fewer are measuring customer effort score. And the fewest have yet to tie together all the different pieces that have to happen to make it actually be successful and coachable data that you can affect and that you can drive change off of. So that being said, you brought a really interesting point up about this kind of disconnect and not knowing where customers are, what they're doing. And the biggest challenge that I've seen today, but I also see that technology companies recognize, is that we're talking a lot about omni-channel today, right? We hear you go to a conference, you go online, you hear omni-channel, but the reality is before omni-channel can even happen, we have to first be able to just manage and understand the customer's cross-channel experience. We have to understand, like you gave that example of them being on that review site and then posting a tweet and then calling in. And right now, most organizations, overwhelming majority, single-digit percentage, actually are beginning to take the steps to integrating technology that can gain that insight in those different channels and see how the journey kind of moves across interactions, not just with the contact center, but with the entire organization. And so to me, this is the other shift there, because we do have a lot of those antiquated systems that we try to like Frankenstein stitch together. And integrating technology, I mean, this is in like the top 5 things that just like keep contact center leaders up at night. And so there is going to be this point where, you know, we're starting to see the early adopters move into these technologies that actually can glean the insight off of all of the different channels. You know, there'll be some time till they really finesse it and get to the point where the information's usable. You know, but I really think that in the next probably 18 to 36 months, we're going to see that kind of first wave of technology really start to be embraced in a lot of the enterprise organizations, or even some of startups in particular, right? Startup culture right now is amazing. You see a lot of new companies starting all the time. And with the cloud, they're nimble enough to kind of just move into SaaS solutions and right, have this kind of insight. So I think it's closer than we think it is, but I think that for certain organizations that, you know, are just naturally slow to adopt, and let's face it, the contact center is kind of at the brunt of that. It's going to be a while still, but I mean we are getting there. So don't, you know, I don't want people watching this to feel that this is like far away, because it's not. It's here. It's possible. It's right. It's just going to be a little while longer, I think, till most of us actually see this in our centers.
All right, so we've spent some time talking about new metrics. Next question for you guys is, what advice do you have for rolling out these new metrics and introducing them to agents? Neal, I want to start with you.
Thank you. So it's a great question. We quickly touched on it in yesterday's chat. The easy thing is introducing a metric and just kind of pushing it down to the supervisors, to the agents. I think the challenge, though, is, and what we've tried and finally learned that is critical, is explaining why. Why it's important that we're introducing this metric, what point it serves, what the objective is, what the goal of it is, why it benefits us, and in our case, why it benefits our clients. We feel that if everyone is on board and understands the why, then we're more likely to achieve the metric and have buy-in. If we don't, we'll find that everyone is pulling in their own separate direction, and the thing just sort of falls apart, and there's resistance to change, and it becomes a disaster. So I think before you introduce anything, you've got to have a sit-down, either face-to-face or virtual, or kind of just explain to everyone why we're doing this, what the purpose is, and when possible, and when budget exists, throw some money behind it, or throw something behind it so that there's some extra incentive for people to get on board. I know there's sometimes reasons not to put money behind things. I think that as you introduce something, it can be helpful to throw some money behind it to prove that it's important, and that everyone is putting their full weight behind it.
Absolutely.
So I want to add on here, because I don't think why goes far enough. I think we also let them know how they can affect it. Because if I'm going to hold you accountable for something, I want to know how what you're doing actually has an impact on it. Because all too often, that's the biggest problem we face in our contact centers, is we're holding agents accountable for things that they can't actually affect. So why? Absolutely, we need to let them know why, but then how you're going to impact it, how you're going to affect it, and how those two things then come together.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about training, and Neal, you're right on. In my history, there hasn't been enough clear communication as to why we're changing, or why we're coming up with this new thing that you're going to be held responsible for. And then right along with that, you got to throw the money into it, and you got to throw the training into it, because as Justin said, it's one thing to say you're going to be held responsible for something, but it's a completely other thing to train and say this is how and why it's going to be important, and then this is how you're going to adjust what you're currently doing to make it match what we're going to be doing in the future. And I think that too many people or too many places are probably not doing that. And unfortunately, and this is maybe another conversation for another time, contact centers are what? Cost centers.
62%
not
of them are.
Profit centers.
Oh, I think Justin might disagree with that.
I disagree completely, but that's what we've been taught for years, right?
And it's still the majority of organizations today are perceived as such.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys will love this one. Anecdotally, we have a client that for them, AHT, particularly talk time, is a huge issue for them. They are always pushing us to drop average handle time. You know, we try to push them to the other side of the argument that average handle time is not the most important. But, you know, all right, so be it. We can't always win that argument. And so they push us and they push us and they push us, and we try to push it down to at the agent and supervisor level. But one of the things, Justin, that you reminded me is, yeah, we explain to them why and why sometimes cost is related, and that's an important factor that's taken into account. But we don't always do enough to make sure we train the group how to reduce talk time or how to achieve a metric and how they can favorably impact that metric. And it's so true, and thank you for adding that.
So here's that piece around AHT, and I was in a similar situation where cut down AHT, and we kept focusing on this number instead of the behaviors that were driving the number. So is it because I have technology that it takes so long for a certain process? Do I have it because an agent likes to talk about how her kitten Snuggles was in a Meow Mix commercial? What's the thing? Is it a behavior? Is it a process? What is it that's actually driving it? Because that's coachable then. That I can affect. I can't just say shave time down because that's your current calls are 6 minutes. You get asked to shave them down for 2 minutes, and what will the customers learn? How to hate your company, right? That's what happens when we just focus on an outcome and not what's actually driving that outcome.
Yeah, maybe you need to readjust your instruction manual that you give to your customers, because then they won't need so much time on the phone with you.
Yep.
Ooh, burn. Well, you guys have brought up some good points. I feel like we could keep this discussion going and going and going. And luckily, we have another metrics conversation to come in our next ICMI chat. So if you guys are free, like I said, every Tuesday, 1 o'clock Eastern Time, we'd love to have you guys join us for the chat. Just use hashtag ICMI chat to follow along and participate. Before we go, one last question for you guys. In one sentence, what do you love most about ICMI chat? And Al, we'll start with you.
No, you're not going to start with me because I can't get anything down to one sentence.
Put you on
the spot. I'll start. As the ICMI, I'll start. So the coolest thing about ICMI chat for me has been what started as like quick, short conversations around a similar topic has turned into some really amazing professional relationships, some great people in my network that when we've met now in person, it's like we've known each other, have been colleagues for a really long time. And so for me, it has been an amazing opportunity to just build my network and to meet really amazing, smart people like Al and Neal.
Like Neal.
The answer. Al didn't get the nickname The Answer just because. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that everyone talks about networking. This goes further beyond networking. This is a chance to interact on a fairly intimate basis with thought leaders, people that are extremely knowledgeable and are doing some pioneering, really state-of-the-art things in our industry. The regular group of people and the people that pop in every now and then, when they come up with some of these comments and ideas, it's kind of like, wow, mind-blowing stuff. We always talk about the hashtag mic drop. Some of the people and the regulars, come up with these ideas like, man, like, I don't know where they came up with this stuff. And I use it in my own call center, and I use it in the way we operate and the things we offer our clients and the things and procedures we're trying to develop at our center and a company. These are just the opportunity to interact and share this stuff and absorb, for me, is incredibly valuable.
See, I knew they couldn't do it in a sentence, so that's why I didn't want to go first.
Wait, we had the one sentence rule.
Like they said, one sentence, ICMI chat is a community of awesomeness. It's been growth. It's been professional development. It's been just personal growth, personal getting to know everybody. So in a sentence, ICMI chat is about growth and about development and about community.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. I couldn't agree more, and I echo all of your sentiments. It's been great getting to know each of you a little bit more, as well as all the other members of our community, and we'd love to add more people into the fold. So once again, you can reach me in the contact information listed below if you'd like to learn more. But Al, Justin, and Neal, I want to thank you once again for your time today, and thank you all for tuning in, and hope to see you on Twitter soon.
See you.
Thanks all.
Have a good one.